Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Someone once said that in everyday life, things go from pretty good to not so good. But seemingly, the sentiment in capital markets, stocks, bonds, investing, go from flawless to hopeless. And right now, the current situation is approaching freneticism and downright panic. Welcome again to the most widely watched source of Carolina business, policy, and public affairs. I'm Chris William. Thank you for supporting this dialogue almost 30 years now. On this special program, Part 2, we will take a look at the surprisingly fast effect in the advent of course, COVID-19 or the coronavirus with someone who is near to the center of monetary policy and leading, in some ways, fiscally here in our region. This is Part 2 of our two-part conversation with the Richmond Federal Reserve President, Mr. Tom Barkin, and we start again in just a moment.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. BARINGS, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Part 2 of An Executive Profile, featuring Tom Barkin, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond.
Hello, welcome again to our program and Part 2 of a special conversation with Tom Barkin, who is the President of the Richmond Federal Reserve, which includes the Carolinas, of course. Mr. Barkin, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
Last week, we talked about COVID and the impact here and now in the Carolinas, and certainly on places like, or industries like the restaurant industry. This time, we are taping this program a week prior to its actual airing, so it's important to know that in the context of this, and the date is on the bottom of your screen anyway, but it's important to know that some of the comments that President Barkin will be saying and some of the questions I ask will have some dating to it, or maybe the shelf life might not be as fresh. So again, welcome to the program. President Barkin, when we take a look at the longer term effects here, how will does the reality of the situation, I'm trying to figure out a way to get to, when does the reality of the situation finally settle in with people to know that, and of course this is my term and it's not insensitive, but the sky's not falling. And when do we get to a point where we can be comfortable with the manage of the public health crisis?
Yeah, when we talked last week, I compared it to 9/11 and TSA.
Yeah.
Right, and just a reminder, no one flew 2 weeks after 9/11, but eventually the TSA rolled out. It was messy. You had the whole process in the airport. You had the lines. You had a sense that people were taking care of your safety, and so you could convince yourself it was time to fly again. I think now we're going to need to work on what is the epidemic version of that, right? I think you rightly say coronavirus isn't the flu, but it's a kind of flu. And for the flu, we have, I think the number is 20,000 deaths a year, 200,000+ people catch it every year. And yet we've gotten ourselves comfortable with living everyday life, understanding that the flu is out there. And so the question is, what would get us comfortable living everyday life, understanding that coronavirus is out there? And I think, to me, it's pretty straightforward that some combination of confidence that you could control it, there's a treatment for it, there's a vaccine for it. Those things feel very important. I also think there's something about a protocol, which is, how do we live our lives so that we minimize the chance we're going to get it? Right now, if you see somebody who's sick and has the flu, you have enough experience to stay away. What's the version of it for coronavirus? Even if we don't have a vaccine, if you could tell me what are the signs for when I know I'm at risk, I think you could imagine, you can imagine individuals just changing their hygiene patterns. I've told in Japan that situations of the flu actually cut in half this year because people were washing their hands so often that they actually were pretty healthy on that hygiene. And maybe that's where we could get. You could imagine restaurants setting up for more distance between tables, if that's what people talk about. You could imagine a different sort of cleaning regimen that planes, hotel rooms, whatever would go through. But I think once we get our arms around what it is we've got, I think American businesses, as creative as they are, will figure out ways to convince people that you can live life as normal with this virus, this type of flu.
Is it overstating it to say this is going to change the way that we operate remotely, as you just described it, in hygiene and in health-wise, with the idea that we can be productive and get things done without having to go to a physical location, as we've done for so many decades?
I want to be careful about over-predicting, even though we're a week away from a week from now, because a lot of it depends on how controllable this seems. As I said, with airline travel, there were lots of predictions in 2001 that we would never travel again. I can remember I lived in Atlanta at the time, and flights between Atlanta and Charlotte or Atlanta and Columbia were actually cut because people weren't traveling. They were on planes, they were driving. But then eventually they came back. And so I think there's absolutely a scenario where this sort of fades into the distance and life looks a lot like it looked yesterday. But I could also imagine different scenarios. And in particular, if this seems like an ongoing thing, I do think some barriers to things like work at home, have been released. In our shop, we were really worried about having the network bandwidth to have 15,000 people. We have 15,000 connections. And so we upped our connections massively to make sure that our people could be effective working from home.
And
maybe
were there
that's
any
something,
hiccups? Any problems at all, network?
It's gone seamlessly.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we haven't had people dropped from a conference call or those kind of things, but I think seamlessly. But that's the kind of planning businesses might do to enable more of that stuff. But we'll just have to see.
How does it change if you've got arguably the millennials and Gen Z now coming online, being more comfortable with the way that we're working now from home, from remote locations? Will that, and again, I guess another way of asking the same question, will that drive whatever the new process and protocol is for many businesses?
While it could, I still come back to, I think there's something innate in humans that want human touch. And my daughter has been ejected from her college. She's home. She's on Zoom with 5 of her friends in a virtual room as they're doing their homework. Where she really wants to be? She wants to be at college with them. And I think that's how we all are.
Does it change college? Does it change financing? Does it change the way that we look at education?
You can come up with all kinds of scenarios.
Yes,
I wouldn't,
sure.
Want to go there. I have laughed because if you really thought we were in an epidemic environment, you probably wouldn't send everyone's kids to go to school together to infect one another. But of course, you and I both know that's what preschool's called. When you send all your kids to do that. So again, I'm still of a belief that this is a new thing, an uncertain thing, a thing that's causing fear in many circles. It does not strike me as it's out of the bounds of anything we've seen before. I think we will have treatments. I think we will have vaccines. And I do believe people want to be together. And so I don't believe, we're going to go to global homeschooling or
materially change in that way. Yeah.
Based on what I've seen out of this. And I come back to China took a rough 4 or 5 week period. They seem to be operating now. If they can do that, I think we can do that. It's just a matter of getting our tests, getting our protocols right.
Existing issues way before any type of public health threat showed up were things like rural broadband, connectivity for everyone, same speed, level the playing field. Does this turbocharge efforts in states like the Carolinas to really put serious dollars from the general ledger toward this now?
I hope it will. But rural broadband is a great topic. If my daughter was sent home from college and lived in a rural county and didn't have broadband, how would she go to class? And so in large parts of our country, we're assuming availability of things that actually aren't true in many places. And so I think broadband and that kind of infrastructure is going to be every bit as important as water and sewer and electricity and other things. And so I do think it has the potential to raise the public focus on it. Then you get to the issue of funding it, which is really hard. And we're doing some research now. I'll save the output till it's ready. But there are federal programs, there are state programs, there are issues of affordability at a local level. If we did rural electrification, we can do this. But I do think we're going to have to get clear on the question of who pays and how much and what mechanism of delivery is the most efficient for each type of market.
But would you think, and again, not to go down the same road, but would you think legislators would be more sympathetic to this, to fast tracking this type of project?
I would hope so. Again, you send people home from a public school because of epidemic risk, and you tell them, don't worry, work at home, and then they can't work at home. By the way, the libraries and Starbucks are also closed, so they can't go get free Wi-Fi there. How are they going to do the work that you've sent them home to do? I think it's a backup plan. I don't think not educating our kids is a good answer. So I think coming up with some facility to do that is absolutely critical. But how exactly that works legislatively, I don't know.
Going forward, and things have moved very quickly, of course, and we'll again at this taping date, we are March 20th. And this program is now airing a week later. There has been a lot of debate in Congress about fiscal stimulus, fiscal policy. What can we do for corporations like the airlines? Nikki Haley, former South Carolina governor, resigned last week in protest to say she did not want to be, and I'm paraphrasing, she did not want to be part of a company that seeks a corporate bailout. That's her description. But that does bring up the issue of Congress addressing this, much like a lot of the issues that came up in 08 and 09, when the Fed, when others, got a lot of heat for bailing the banks out, when many thought that let the market forces find what they will. How does that apply now to airlines, to the hospitality? What should be done?
So maybe two angles on this. The first is it's hard to find a fault in the hotels, in the restaurants, in the retailers for getting themselves into this kind of crisis. This is a disease. It came from outside. It's been handled as it's been handled. We are, from a public health standpoint, taking a bunch of initiatives, social distancing, to flatten the curve, to elongate it, to make sure we've got enough capacity in our hospitals as best we can to handle and help the sick and the dying. And that public health choice has implications on a whole other set of businesses: restaurants, hotels, airlines, retailers, and the like. And so that feels very different to me than you made a bunch of bad loans, you set up a bad structure, and why are we helping you out? This feels like the public should say, we're making this choice for the health of the public. It has these consequences, and we should have a conversation about what we do about that, first thing. Second thing is, people think about stimulus, and it's all about what we do tomorrow. And of course, by the time this is aired, we will have made a set of decisions. But I think about it in two pieces. I think about short term and medium term, or I think about today and relaunch. Now, what do I mean by today? We're going to have a lot of people without jobs that had jobs a month ago. And I think we have an unemployment insurance system that operates to support it, and anything we can do to help support the income retention and the health care of people who are now suddenly without jobs in the midst of this virus, I think is absolutely critical. And so there are lots of different ways to skin a cat, but that to me is an important short-term initiative. A second short-term initiative is this question of how do you minimize the check mark for businesses, small businesses in particular, that may be having a 1, 2, or 3 month downturn driven by all this. That's a very complicated thing to do well. And so forget the whole question of whether money should go there or not. Just delivering it to the right place and the right time. Because, if you have a small retailer who's made the decision to lay off their team because no one's coming into the store, and now you go give them a bunch of money, I don't know how you create the incentive for them to bring everyone into the store with no customers. So there's something we've got to do there, but I think it's very hard to get right. And then I jump to the restart or the long term. And the biggest companies, if it's a month or two, they're in the restart story. So in the restart story, we've talked before about a health protocol, testing, making sure people can go back to work. I think there are very real consumer incentives you could do as part of a restart. Sales tax holidays are a classic kind of example. Gas prices are very low, so once you're out, that should help people have more income. You could do some investment or hiring incentives to try to get businesses back in the mix. And I think we are going to have to land the question of these big industries that I believe are really essential to the functioning of this country. How are we going to support them on the back side of this? Because they will take on, just as the airlines did after 9/11, a lot of debt. Okay, is the issue getting them the debt and the cash flow? Is the issue operate? And I think these are big, complicated political questions.
And how I don't want to say how long of a tail has the Fed modeled this out to say, 12 months we should see X, or is there still way too many unknowns?
We submit
when you talk about the restart. Let me use the restart. We
submit every meeting our what's called an SEP, economic projections, and our team had a lot of them coming into the last meeting. I think we decided, because we moved the meeting earlier, not to release them. And I have to say I cheered when that happened because it's really hard. I think, as Yogi Berra said, it's really hard to predict the future, even when it's uncertain or something. It's hard to do that. So I think if we could get some clarity on how long it lasts, then I think the models we've got, which talk about different sectors and unemployment rates by sector, then they can start to operate. But if you can't figure out the duration and you can't figure out the slope of recovery, then it's pretty hard to model.
So are we, and this is a little ethereal even for a Fed president, but so are we forever changed?
I'll say this as the way Fed presidents do. My base case is this is a couple month thing, not a couple year thing, not a couple decade thing, that this is a virus that eventually we will have treatment for and a vaccine for. And my base case is we're not going to have another one next year and another one the year after that and another one the year after that. In all that case, I think we will wash our hands more. I think we'll be more aware of our distance. Hopefully, we will infect fewer people who have the flu or other versions of it, the other thing. But I don't think this has to change the economy and the world it works. And of course, there are other scenarios. But my base case is still, I haven't seen anything in this that indicates this is more than a new disease that we have to come on top of. An interesting fact that I have to say I lived it but lost it was H1N1 virus. And these numbers aren't perfect, but I read something the other day that said in the US, the H1N1 virus killed like 60,000 people in 2009, and multiple hundreds of thousands of them were sick. I may be misremembering the numbers, but it was a really big set of numbers. And I said, wait a second, I was working. How did that happen? Well, what was the difference between that and today? 2 weeks after we first talked about H1N1, they introduced Tamiflu. And they said, in my office, we stocked Tamiflu. So if anyone got it, we had what you needed. Okay, life went on. Right, so I can see life going on as much more likely than life not going on. It does require, some confidence on the health treatment.
Yeah, okay. Let's change subject a little bit. And we don't want to spend so much on COVID-19 that we miss a couple things. One of the things that's pretty impressive, and if you don't mind me saying, and this is not leading, but the Fed has undertaken a diversity in leadership on the board. On the Richmond board, you have just about equal balance of people of color, of male, of female. That's clearly by intent. Is that by intent? And what advantages does it give the Fed to be so focused on diversity and inclusion at the board level?
Well, thanks for saying that. We have 9 board members. 3 of them are bankers by statute, and then 6 of them are community leaders, business leaders, and the like. And I think we've always thought about diversity, and certainly I think about diversity, but I think about it in multiple different ways. You mentioned race and gender, which of course matters, and you'll get lots of different perspectives. But, I'd add, we in the last year have added a board member who runs a retail real estate firm and has unbelievable insights into what's happening in retailers and consumer marketplaces right now. We've got a board member who works in the defense industry, and certainly in our world, it's pretty important to understand what's happening in Washington, what's happening to those payments. We've got a board member from Charlotte who's runs a healthcare system. We've got a board member from Charlotte who's in construction, we've got one from Columbia who's a banker. I put all those together, and if I think about our board meeting we had even a week ago, wow, the different perspectives I got. Here's what's happening in consumer. Here's what's happening in manufacturing. Here's what's happening in construction. Here's what's happening in healthcare. Here's how the banks are responding. We have one's the university president at Howard University. All right, we've shut down our university. Here's how we're treating our workers. Here's how we're treating our students. To bring the entire economy together in one room is unbelievably powerful, and I really appreciate greatly what they do for us. And I say we have a meeting roughly 10 days before every FOMC meeting. And I always say I bring my best thinking of what's happening in the economy in, and then they blow it apart because they really see what's happening on the ground. And that diversity of thought and perspective, and that's really what we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really, really pleased with that group.
When we get past the COVID threat here and now, and you get to spend more time on the things that might matter longer term, presidential politics in 2020 certainly will. How does whatever happens in the presidential race in November, how does that affect what the Fed thinks, what it does, and especially in light of a lot of the tools, as we talked about last show, a lot of tools you've already deployed. How does all this come together post-COVID-19 when you're staring down partisan politics in the fall?
Well, in the politics, I think we're an independent agency. We don't focus on Democrats or Republicans or this person or that person. We have a job that's been given to us by Congress, and that job is stable prices and maximum employment, and we work very hard on that job. So that's our job. On that job, let's say we have a couple-month check mark, the economy starts to go back on recovery. We're going to be asking ourselves questions of how fast does the employment situation recover? Critical question. Did anything happen in this crisis that somehow affects the pricing dynamics of businesses? And it could be because the economy goes south, people are reluctant to raise prices. It could also be because you have shortages in various goods that people have now gotten accustomed to raising prices. And so we'll have to renormalize employment, we'll have to renormalize inflation, then we'll have to understand what growth trajectory is the American economy now on. I give talks almost every week when I'm out there, and for the last year and a half, I've had kind of a standard outline that I work against what's in the news or what the latest data is. I've got to throw that outline out because we're not in economy's in a good place, unemployment's low, inflation's firming toward our target anymore. Now we're in a place of great uncertainty, and we'll be talking a lot about the trajectory on the way out.
Is it a complete reset then when you start to look at prices? Growth of prices, growth of unemployment, it almost doesn't matter what happened pre-COVID. This is a reset. Is that what you're saying?
I think what's happened in the last month to our economy and what's going to happen for sure in the next 2 months to our economy means that we've gone from a very strong, low unemployment, wait a second, are we about to see inflation spike through, to a very different environment. And that doesn't mean we can't 6 months after go back to that environment. I hope we do. But the question of whether we just get back in the car and keep driving again, or whether there's a more lengthy rebuilding of confidence and of industry. That's the question I'm going to be focused on.
Is there any concern, and we've got less than a minute left, is there any, and I know you have to be sensitive about forward comments regarding interest rates, is there any concern that the interest rates now, as the Fed has controlled them, are so low that they're no longer an effective tool to use going forward?
Well, the interest rates are very low right now. And so, of course, one of the questions will be, at what point do you start to normalize them again? And I think you might have seen in the statement last week some forward guidance on that said we'd want to see with confidence that the economy that we'd weathered this situation and we were on the road to hit our dual mandate objectives.
We'll have to wrap it.
Okay.
I mean, we are done. You're kind to do that, but really more than that, thank you for joining us in the studio, even under some pressure from your own family. We appreciate this commitment, President Barkin.
Great to be here, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for watching. Wash your hands. Stay healthy. Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, BARINGS, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.